I am Serena, 32 years old, and for the last 3 years, I have played the role of a devoted, slightly naive lab manager perfectly. My husband Julian believes I check test tubes for a living, oblivious to the fact that I own Vanguard Biocorp, the very pharmaceutical giant he has been trying to court for investment. He thinks he is the shark, and I am the bait. But sharks should be careful when they swim in waters they do not understand. The sun was beginning to set over the rolling hills of the Napa Valley Vineyard, casting a golden hue over the 200 guests seated at tables draped in Italian silk. It was a picture-perfect wedding, exactly what $500,000 buys you. Julian stood next to me, adjusting his bespoke tuxedo, sweating slightly despite the cool evening breeze. To anyone else, he looked like a nervous groom overwhelmed by emotion. But I knew better. I knew that sweat was the cold perspiration of a man who was about to execute a crime. We were standing at the head table, the focal point of the entire reception. The speeches were about to begin. I turned slightly to adjust the train of my dress, catching my reflection in the polished surface of a silver serving spoon on the table. That was when I saw it. In the distorted reflection, I watched Julian's hand hover over my crystal champagne flute. With a sleight of hand he must have practiced a dozen times, he tapped a small vial hidden in his palm. A fine white powder cascaded into my drink and dissolved instantly into the pale gold bubbles. My heart did not race. My hands did not tremble. Instead, a cold, clinical detachment washed over me. It was the same focus I used when handling volatile chemical compounds in the lab. He was trying to drug me. I knew exactly why. I had overheard him 3 days ago on the phone with his brother-in-law Darnell. They needed me to cause a scene. They needed me to look mentally unstable in front of the city's elite so Julian could file for an emergency conservatorship. He wanted control of my trust fund to cover his $2 million in gambling debts and failed crypto investments. He turned to me, a loving smile plastered on his face, and handed me the glass. "Here, darling," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You look parched. Drink up before the toasts. It will help your nerves." I looked at the glass. Then I looked at him. I smiled the kind of smile a predator gives before the kill. "Oh, Julian, you are so sweet," I said. I reached out, but instead of taking the glass, I placed my hand on his chest and leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. As I did, my other hand smoothly took the glass from his fingers, and in the same motion placed his own glass into my empty hand. It was a seamless swap, obscured by the volume of my veil and the closeness of our bodies. I pulled back and held up the glass he had originally poured for himself. "Thank you, honey," I said, "but you should start. It is bad luck for the bride to drink first." Julian, arrogant and distracted by the applause of the guests, did not even glance at the glass in his hand. He was too busy preening for the crowd. He raised the glass, my glass, the poisoned glass, high in the air. To us, he announced, his voice booming. He brought the crystal rim to his lips and drained it in one long swallow. I watched the liquid disappear down his throat. I leaned in close, my lips brushing his ear, and whispered so only he could hear. "Wrong glass, darling." He froze. The glass lowered slowly. He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes, and then, as the realization hit him, his face went a ghostly shade of white. Never underestimate a woman who handles hazardous chemicals for a living, especially when she controls the bank accounts. If you want to see how a gold-digging husband accidentally poisons himself with his own trap, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is going to be a bumpy ride. The chemicals Julian had acquired were fast-acting. I knew this because I recognized the symptoms immediately. I should have, considering my company developed the base compound for veterinary sedation. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus his eyes as he tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the chatter, silencing the room. My beautiful wife Julian started his words slightly slurred. He gripped the microphone stand as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Everyone says I am lucky. But let's be real." He paused, swaying on his feet. The crowd chuckled nervously, thinking it was part of the act, a groom overwhelmed by champagne. But I saw the dilation of his pupils. The inhibitions were stripping away layer by layer. "Let's be real," he continued, his voice getting louder, more aggressive. "I am the prize here. Look at this suit, $3,000. Do you know who paid for it?" He pointed a shaking finger at me. She did. She pays for everything. It is exhausting, you know, being with someone who counts every penny. A murmur went through the crowd. My mother, sitting in the front row, stiffened. Darnell, sitting at the family table next to my sister-in-law Vanessa, looked up from his phone, his eyes widening. He knew the plan. This was not the plan. Julian was supposed to be the grieving husband, comforting his crazy wife, not the one making a scene. Julian laughed, a wet, guttural sound. But it is over now. Finally. I am going to have so much freedom. And the money. God, the money. He stumbled away from the podium, knocking over a flower arrangement. Water spilled across the expensive tablecloth. He didn't notice. He began walking, or rather lurching, toward the table where the investors from Vanguard Biocorp were sitting. These were men and women I had handpicked, people who respected me as their hidden CEO. Julian thought they were just my boss's friends. "Hey!" he shouted at Mr. Henderson, the chief financial officer of my company. You old miser, you wouldn't give me a loan last month, would you? Said my business plan was garbage. Well, guess what? I don't need your loan anymore. I'm going to buy your whole pathetic company once I sign the papers." Mr. Henderson looked at me, his eyebrows raised in shock. I simply took a sip of my water, my expression unreadable. I was letting him dig his own grave shovel by shovel. Julian turned back to the crowd, his face now glistening with a sheen of cold sweat. He looked like he was melting under the stage lights. "You all think you are better than me," he slurred, spitting slightly. "Especially you, Darnell." "You think I don't know? You skimmed off the top of the venue deposit?" Darnell shot up from his seat, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. He was a large man, flashy, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was definitely a replica. He rushed toward the stage, his face a mask of panic. "Julian," Darnell shouted, forcing a smile for the guests. All right, that is enough champagne for the groom. Let's get you some water, buddy." Darnell grabbed Julian's arm, trying to pull him away from the microphone. Julian shoved him off with surprising strength, fueled by the chemical surge in his system. "Get off me!" Julian screamed, the microphone capturing every distorted syllable. "I am speaking. I am the man of the house. I am the king." But the king was losing his balance. The sedative was shutting down his motor functions. His legs turned to rubber. He grabbed the tablecloth to steady himself, pulling the entire spread, the wedding cake, the crystal tower, the heavy silver candelabras down with him. The crash was deafening. Plates shattered. Champagne sprayed over the front row guests. The 5-tier cake, a lemon and elderflower masterpiece that cost more than Darnell's car, collapsed into a heap of frosting and sponge on top of Julian. He lay there in the wreckage, his tuxedo smeared with icing and broken glass. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a line of white foam began to bubble at the corner of his mouth. His limbs twitched sporadically. The silence in the venue was absolute for a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. Guests screamed. Chairs were overturned as people rushed forward or backed away in horror. But the loudest sound came from the head table. Patricia, my mother-in-law, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly sprang to life. She was a woman who cared more about appearances than oxygen wearing a white dress to her son's wedding, because she couldn't stand not being the bride. She didn't rush to check Julian's pulse. She didn't call for a doctor. She pointed a manicured finger straight at me. "She did this," Patricia shrieked, her voice piercing the air like a siren. "She poisoned him. I saw her." The accusation hung heavy in the air, heavier than the scent of the smashed cake. Darnell was kneeling beside Julian, slapping his face, trying to wake him up. But Patricia kept her eyes locked on me, her face twisted in a snarl of hatred. "You witch! You tried to kill my son!" Patricia screamed, marching toward me. "Call the police! Arrest her!" I stood there calm amidst the storm. I looked at Julian twitching on the floor, foaming at the mouth from the very drug he intended for me. I looked at Patricia seizing the opportunity to destroy me, even while her son was convulsing. And I looked at Darnell, whose eyes were darting around, looking for an exit. I smoothed the silk of my dress, looked Patricia dead in the eye, and said nothing. I didn't need to. The show was just beginning, and I had the best seat in the house. The sterile scent of antiseptic and floor wax hit me the moment the automatic doors slid open. It was a sharp contrast to the aroma of expensive wine and roasted lamb that had filled the air at the vineyard less than an hour ago. The ride to St. Jude's Medical Center had been a blur of sirens and flashing lights, but while the paramedics worked frantically on Julian in the back of the ambulance, I had sat in the front seat checking my emails. I needed to make sure the press release was ready to go out at midnight. I walked toward the VIP waiting area, my heels clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. I was still wearing my wedding dress, though the train was now looped over my arm to keep it from dragging. I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass partition of the nurse's station. I did not look like a distraught bride whose husband had just collapsed. I looked like a woman arriving for a business meeting, albeit one with a very elaborate dress code. As I rounded the corner to the private family lounge, a wall of muscle in a tight gray suit blocked my path. It was Darnell. My brother-in-law stood with his legs spread wide, arms crossed over his chest, trying to look like a bouncer at an exclusive club rather than a failed real estate agent who was currently driving a car he hadn't made a payment on in 3 months. His face was flushed sweat beading on his forehead, betraying the panic beneath his tough guy facade. "You are not going in there, Serena." Darnell spat, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. He stepped forward, invading my personal space. The smell of stale champagne and nervous sweat radiated off him. "You have done enough damage for one night." I stopped maintaining a comfortable distance. I tilted my head slightly, studying him with the same detached curiosity I used when observing a bacteria culture under a microscope. "Move out of the way, Darnell," I said, my voice low and even. "I need to speak to the doctor." "You do not need to do anything," he sneered, jabbing a finger toward my face. "You are toxic. Julian told me everything. He told me how you have been stressing him out, how you have been pushing him to the edge. And now this. You think we are stupid. We know what you did." I raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly did I do?" "Darnell, you poisoned him," he hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. He loved the audience. "But do not worry. We are not just going to let this slide. I have already called the family lawyer. We are going to sue you for everything you have got. Attempted murder, intentional infliction of emotional distress. By the time we are done with you, you will be lucky if you can afford a public defender." I almost laughed. It took every ounce of my self-control to keep my expression neutral. The family lawyer he was referring to was Richard Sterling. Darnell seemed to have conveniently forgotten, or perhaps he truly never knew, that Richard Sterling did not work for the Brooks family. He worked for me. I was the one who paid his $50,000 annual retainer. I was the one who signed his checks. Julian and his family just used his name to intimidate people, unaware that every time they called him Richard, billed my personal account for the consultation, usually with a note attached that read, "Your in-laws are calling again, should I answer?" It was fascinating to watch Darnell puff his chest out, threatening me with my own employee. "And let us not forget," Darnell continued, gaining confidence from my silence, "I know about your little savings account. Julian told me you have been hoarding money while he struggles to keep this family afloat. That is marital property, sweetheart. And when the judge hears about how you tried to kill him, that money is going to be ours." I looked at Darnell, really looked at him. I remembered a rainy Tuesday afternoon just last month. He had called me sobbing, begging to meet at a coffee shop 3 towns over, so Vanessa wouldn't find out. He had sat across from me, handshaking, admitting he had gambled away the down payment for the house he had promised my sister-in-law. He needed $50,000 fast, or Vanessa would leave him. I had written that check. I had handed it to him under the table like a drug deal. He had cried, promised me he would pay me back, promised he would do anything for me. He had called me his guardian angel, and now here he was blocking my path, threatening to sue me, accusing me of hoarding the very money that had saved his marriage 4 weeks ago. The audacity was almost impressive. "Darnell," I said softly, "do you really want to talk about finances right now?" He blinked, confused by my tone. "Do not try to change the subject. I am not," I replied. "I am just thinking about that $50,000 check I wrote last month. The one for the house on Elm Street, the one you begged me for because you lost the original money on sports betting." Darnell's face went from flushed red to a pale, sickly gray in less than a second. His eyes darted to the door of the waiting room where his wife Vanessa was sitting. "You shut up," he whispered, his aggression replaced by instant terror. "You promised you wouldn't say anything." "I promised I wouldn't say anything to Vanessa as long as you treated me with respect," I corrected him. But blocking a wife from seeing her husband in the hospital, accusing her of murder, that does not feel very respectful, Darnell. He opened his mouth to stammer an excuse, but before he could speak, the door to the waiting room burst open. Patricia stormed out. If Darnell was the bouncer, Patricia was the main event. My mother-in-law was a vision of chaotic grief. Her mascara was running in artistic streaks down her cheeks, likely applied that way intentionally in the restroom mirror. She was clutching a handkerchief to her chest, her other hand gripping a knockoff Hermes Birkin bag so tightly her knuckles were white. "There she is," Patricia shrieked. The sound was piercing, causing a passing nurse to flinch. "There is the serpent!" She marched toward me, her heels stomping on the floor. She had always hated me. From the moment Julian introduced me as a lab manager, she had looked down her nose at me. She wanted Julian to marry a socialite, someone who could elevate their status. Instead, she got me a working girl who in her eyes was lucky to even be invited to dinner. She had no idea that the jewelry she was wearing, the car she drove, and the country club membership she cherished were all subsidized by the dividends of the company I owned. "You have some nerve showing your face here," Patricia spat, stopping just inches from me. "My son is in there fighting for his life because of you." "Patricia, please lower your voice," I said calmly. "This is a hospital. Do not tell me what to do," she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. "You have always been jealous of him, jealous of his shine. You wanted to ruin his big day. Well, congratulations, Serena, you ruined it. But you are not going to get away with it. I am going to make sure everyone knows what you are. A gold digger, a psycho, a murderer." She was projecting so hard, she could have been an IMAX theater. She was the one who had pushed Julian to find a rich wife. She was the one who had spent the last 3 years hinting that I should take out a larger life insurance policy on myself. I looked at her, at the frantic desperation in her eyes. She wasn't worried about Julian dying. She was worried about the gravy train stopping. She was worried about who would pay the mortgage on the sprawling colonial house she lived in alone if Julian was incapacitated. "I am going to destroy you," Patricia growled. She raised her hand. Time seemed to slow down. I watched her hand rise the gold bracelets I had bought her for Christmas sliding down her forearm. I saw the intent in her eyes. She wanted to slap me. She wanted to physically humiliate me in front of Darnell, in front of the hospital staff, to assert her dominance. She wanted to prove that she was the matriarch, and I was just the help. I did not flinch. I did not step back. As her hand swung forward, arching toward my cheek, I moved. It was a simple, efficient motion. I raised my left hand and intercepted hers mid-air. I caught her wrist with a grip of steel. The sound of the impact was a dull thud, flesh against flesh, but not on my face. Her hand stopped abruptly inches from my nose. Patricia gasped, her eyes widening in shock. She tried to pull her hand back, but I held on. I wasn't hurting her, but I wasn't letting go. I squeezed just enough to let her feel the strength I usually kept hidden. Silence fell over the hallway. Darnell stared, his mouth hanging open. He had never seen anyone touch Patricia, let alone stop her. I stared into her eyes, my expression completely flat. I didn't look angry. I didn't look sad. I looked bored. Don't I said my voice barely above a whisper? Yet it carried more weight than all her screaming combined. I looked down at her hand trapped in mine. Her nails were long sculpted acrylics, painted a garish shade of red encrusted with cheap rhinestones. One of them was already chipped. I released her wrist with a dismissive little shove as if I were tossing away a used tissue. "Don't ruin your nails, Patricia," I said, smoothing the silk of my dress. "You can't afford to fix them." Patricia stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The insult hit her harder than the slap would have hit me. It struck at the core of her insecurity, her lack of money, her dependence, her facade of wealth that was crumbling around her. Before she could recover, before Darnell could remember his lines, I stepped past them. "Now, if you will excuse me," I said, not looking back, "I have a husband to check on, and I believe the police are on their way to take your statements. You might want to think about what you are going to say. Perjury is a felony, and unlike your nails, prison jumpsuits don't come in designer prints." The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed with a low, irritating buzz, but my mind was miles away, transported back to a moment that had happened exactly 72 hours prior. That was the moment my marriage actually ended. The wedding today had just been the funeral service. It was Tuesday afternoon. I was supposed to be at a bridal spa treatment, a generous gift from Patricia that I later realized was merely a tactic to get me out of the house so Darnell could drop off the package. But the spa had called to cancel due to a burst pipe, and I had decided to come home early to surprise Julian with his favorite takeout from that little Thai place on 4th Street. I walked into our sprawling colonial house in Greenwich, the kind of house that screams old money even when the occupants are drowning in new debt. It was quiet, too quiet. I had taken off my heels at the door, a habit from my days working late in the lab where silence was necessary for concentration. The thick Persian runners in the hallway absorbed my footsteps completely. As I approached the library, a room Julian used mostly for drinking scotch and pretending to read leather-bound books, I heard his voice. It was pitched high-tight with a panic I had never heard before. "You do not understand. Darnell." Julian was shouting, though he was trying to keep his voice down. "It is all gone. Every single cent." I stopped. The pad thai container in my hand grew warm against my palm. I moved closer to the slightly ajar oak door, pressing myself against the wall. "What do you mean, gone?" Darnell's voice boomed through the speakerphone. I could hear the static of his bad connection, likely from his car. "I mean zero, Darnell." Julian sounded like he was on the verge of tears. "The market crashed overnight. That new coin, the one I told the investors was a sure thing, it was a rug pull. The developers vanished. $2 million of client money, Darnell. Poof. Gone." My breath caught in my throat. $2 million. I knew Julian managed a boutique investment portfolio for a few wealthy friends of his father, but I had no idea he was gambling with crypto, and certainly not with that kind of volume. "If they find out I am dead," Julian continued, the sound of glass clinking against a bottle echoing in the room. He was drinking at 2 in the afternoon. "I will go to prison for fraud. Or worse, the guys I borrowed the leverage from will come for my kneecaps." There was a pause on the line. Then Darnell spoke, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my skin crawl. "You have to trigger the clause, Julian. It is the only way." "What clause?" Julian asked, sounding desperate. "The prenup, you idiot," Darnell snapped. "The one her expensive lawyers drafted. Remember what we read, Section 4, Paragraph B, the emergency conservatorship clause." I froze. I knew that contract inside and out. I had written half of it myself, disguised as my lawyer's work. The clause was standard for high net worth individuals. It stated that if one spouse became mentally incapacitated or posed an immediate danger to themselves or others, the other spouse could be granted temporary emergency power of attorney to manage the estate and freeze assets to prevent financial hemorrhage. It was designed to protect the family fortune from a psychotic break. It was never designed to be a weapon. "I can't just ask for it," Darnell Julian whined. "She is sane. She is the most boringly sane person I know. She organizes her spice rack alphabetically. No judge is going to grant me a conservatorship over a woman whose biggest vice is reading medical journals in bed." "Make her insane then," Darnell said. His voice was cold, devoid of any empathy. "It is the wedding day, Julian. High stress, emotions running high. It is the perfect stage. We just need a trigger." I leaned closer, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the record button. I needed this. I needed every word. "I got the stuff from that vet clinic contact," Julian said, his voice trembling. "The sedative, ketamine blend." "Perfect," Darnell said. "Listen to me. You dose her right before the speeches. Not enough to knock her out cold, just enough to make her dissociate. Hallucinations, paranoia, loss of motor control. She will start screaming, maybe throw something. She will look like she is having a psychotic break in front of 200 of the most influential people in the state." "And then," Julian asked, "and then you play the grieving, terrified husband?" Darnell explained, sounding proud of his twisted screenplay. "You call the paramedics. You tell the police she has been under immense pressure, that she has been hearing voices. You file the emergency motion the next morning. You get control of the Vanguard Biocorp Trust to protect her interests. You use her liquid cash to pay back the investors before they even know the money is missing. By the time she sobers up in the psychiatric ward, you will have balanced the books. It was the Britney Spears playbook weaponized against me by the man who had sworn to protect me. They were planning to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity, and my life's work, all to cover a gambling debt. They wanted to paint me as a hysterical woman, a stereotype they thought would stick, because to them I was just a girl who got lucky with an inheritance, not a brilliant scientist who had built an empire. "I am scared, Darnell," Julian whispered. "What if I overdose her?" "Who cares?" Darnell laughed, a sound that made bile rise in my throat. "If she dies, you get it all anyway without the legal hassle. Win-win. Just do it, Julian. Or are you ready to explain to those investors where their money went?" I heard Julian take a deep, shuddering breath. Okay, I will do it, during the toast. I will slip it in her champagne. She never watches her glass. She trusts me. She trusts me. Those 3 words cut deeper than any knife. He was banking on my love for him to be the instrument of my destruction. He thought my devotion was a weakness, a blind spot he could exploit. I stopped recording. I had enough. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen pumping through my veins. I looked down at the Thai food in my hand. I walked to the kitchen, dumped it into the trash compactor, and crushed it. I did not confront him. I did not scream. If I had stormed in there, he would have denied it. He would have destroyed the evidence, gaslighted me, told me I was hearing things. Or worse, he might have panicked and become violent right then and there. No, I needed him to think he was in control. I needed him to walk into that wedding thinking he was the master puppeteer. I went upstairs, stripped off my clothes, and stood under a freezing cold shower for 20 minutes, scrubbing his imaginary touch off my skin. I formulated my plan under that icy spray. I knew the compound he mentioned. I knew the dosage curve. I knew exactly how long it would take to kick in. If he wanted a show, I would give him one. But he was forgetting one crucial variable in his equation. I wasn't just a rich wife. I was a chemist, and I knew exactly how to handle toxic elements. That night when Julian came to bed smelling of scotch and deceit, he kissed my forehead and told me he couldn't wait to spend the rest of his life with me. I smiled in the dark and whispered, "Me neither, Julian." I lay awake all night listening to his breathing, thinking about the conservatorship laws in this country. How easy it is for a man to take a woman's voice away if he screams loud enough that she is crazy. How many women had been trapped in that nightmare? Not me. Never me. Back in the hospital hallway, the memory faded as a doctor in a white coat approached us. He looked tired. He held a clipboard that contained the scientific confirmation of everything I had overheard in that library. "Family of Julian Brooks?" the doctor asked. Patricia shoved past me, her fake crocodile tears instantly reactivating. "Is he alive? Is my baby alive?" "He is stable," the doctor said, glancing at me with a strange expression. "But we found high levels of a veterinary sedative in his system. It is a miracle his heart didn't stop. We need to know how he ingested this." Patricia pointed a trembling finger at me. "She did it. I told you." I stepped forward, my face a mask of calm. "Actually, doctor," I said, pulling my phone from my clutch, "I think the police will want to hear this recording from 3 days ago. It explains the dosage, the motive, and the method. It seems my husband has a bit of a substance abuse problem he was trying to project onto me." Darnell's face went white. He recognized the date. He recognized the conversation. He realized that for the last 3 days, while he was laughing about spending my money, I had been walking around with a loaded gun in my pocket, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. And I just did. The air in the private waiting room was so thick with tension, you could almost taste the metallic tang of adrenaline. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, the sound sharp enough to cut through the heavy silence. He adjusted his glasses, looking from the frantic face of my mother-in-law to the sweating forehead of my brother-in-law, and finally landing on me. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression unreadable. I knew exactly what he was about to say. I knew it because I had studied the pharmacology of the compound Julian had tried to use. Mrs. Brooks, the doctor, began addressing Patricia, who was vibrating with a mix of fear and anticipation. "We have the toxicology results back from the lab. It confirms our initial suspicions." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest theatrically. "Tell me, doctor. Tell me what she did to him." The doctor frowned slightly at her outburst, but continued professionally. "We found a high concentration of a veterinary sedative in Julian's bloodstream, specifically a potent blend of ketamine and xylazine. It is a tranquilizer commonly used for large livestock, horses mostly. It is extremely dangerous for humans in this dosage. It causes rapid loss of motor function dissociation, and in some cases, respiratory failure." The silence that followed was absolute. Darnell shifted his weight, looking at the floor. He knew exactly where that drug came from. He was the one who had given Julian the contact number for the shady vet clinic in the first place. But Patricia did not look at Darnell. She did not look at the doctor. She spun around to face me, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph plastered across her tear-stained face. It was the look of a woman who had been waiting years for a reason to destroy me, and finally she believed she had the smoking gun. I knew it. She shrieked, her voice echoing off the sterile walls. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You poisoned him. You tried to kill my son with horse tranquilizers. Oh, you are evil, pure evil." She turned back to the doctor, her eyes wide and manic. "You heard it, doctor. You found the poison. Call the police right now. I want this woman in handcuffs before she leaves this room. She is a danger to society." Darnell saw his opening and jumped in, desperate to deflect attention from his own involvement. "Yeah, that is right." He puffed out his chest, trying to look authoritative. "We all saw her hand him that glass. She insisted he drink it. She probably synthesized that stuff in her little lab. Didn't you, Serena? You think you are so smart with your science degrees? They were circling me like sharks who smelled blood in the water. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the toxicology report was the nail in my coffin. In their minds, the narrative was perfect. The jealous, socially awkward wife tries to sedate her dashing husband to keep him under control, but she messes up the dosage. It was a story Patricia could sell to the tabloids. It was a story Darnell could use to blackmail me. I let them have their moment. I let Patricia scream until her throat was raw. I let Darnell puff his chest until he looked ridiculous. I waited until the doctor reached for the phone on the wall, presumably to follow protocol and alert the authorities about a suspected poisoning. "Doctor, wait," I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the hysteria around me. "Don't you listen to her," Patricia yelled. "She is going to lie. I am not going to lie, Patricia," I said, reaching into the pocket of my silk clutch. "And I am not going to argue, because unlike you, I do not rely on volume to make my point. I rely on evidence." I pulled out my phone. It was a sleek black device and the screen was already glowing. I turned it around so they could all see the display. On the screen was a video feed. It was a live stream broadcasting to a private server I had set up weeks ago. The angle was unique. It was shooting from chest height, looking slightly upward. "What is this?" Darnell asked, squinting at the screen. I tapped the screen, rewinding the footage by exactly 1 hour. "This," I said, pointing to the pearl button on the bodice of my wedding dress, "is not a button. It is a high-definition 4K camera with a wide-angle lens and audio recording capabilities. I developed the prototype at Vanguard Biocorp for field researchers who need to document hands-free." I hit play. On the small screen, the scene from the wedding unfolded with crystal clarity. The camera positioned on my chest had a perfect view of Julian standing next to me. We all watched in silence. On the screen, the digital version of me was adjusting my veil. Then Julian's hand came into the frame. The resolution was so high you could see the sweat on his knuckles. We watched as Julian subtly palmed a small glass vial. We watched him hover his hand over the champagne flute, the one on the right. We saw the fine white powder fall from his hand into the golden liquid. Patricia stopped breathing. Her mouth hung open, her eyes glued to the screen. The video continued. It showed Julian handing me the glass. It showed me leaning in to kiss him, and then in perfect, undeniable detail it showed my hands. It showed me taking the poisoned glass from him with my left hand and simultaneously placing his own safe glass into my right hand. It showed me swapping them back. The audio was crisp. "Here, darling, you look parched. Drink up before the toasts. Oh, Julian, you are so sweet." And then the kill shot. The camera captured Julian raising the glass, the one he had just poisoned, and draining it. I paused the video. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Patricia's face had gone from triumphant red to a pale, ghostly white. She looked at the phone, then at me, then at the doctor. Her narrative was crumbling in real time. That is fake," she stammered, but her voice lacked any conviction. "You edited that. It is a live stream, Patricia," I said coldly. "It is time-stamped and uploaded directly to a cloud server that my lawyers have access to. I cannot edit it. I cannot delete it. And neither can you." I turned to the doctor, who was looking at the footage with wide eyes. "Dr. Evans," I said, "as you can see, my husband was not the victim of a poisoning attempt by his wife. He was the victim of his own incompetence. He attempted to drug me to force a medical conservatorship, a plan he discussed with his brother-in-law 3 days ago. Unfortunately for him, he forgot that I have eyes. And fortunately for me, I have a camera." I looked at Darnell. He was backing away toward the door, looking like he was about to be sick. So I continued slipping the phone back into my pocket. "If you need to call the police, please do. But make sure you tell them to bring handcuffs for the man in the hospital bed, and perhaps one extra pair for his accomplice standing right there." Patricia slumped into a chair, defeated. The air had left the room, and with it, her entire world. I stood tall, the pearl button on my dress gleaming under the harsh hospital lights, a silent witness to their destruction. The automatic doors to the waiting area didn't just slide open this time, they were pushed open by the weight of authority. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit marched in their radios, crackling with the static of dispatch codes. I had called them the moment the ambulance left the venue, citing a domestic disturbance and potential poisoning. What Julian and his family didn't realize was that in a game of he said, she said the person who dials 911 first usually controls the initial narrative. Officer Miller, a man with a buzz cut and eyes that had seen too many domestic disputes, scanned the room. His gaze landed on the huddle of Brooks' family members before shifting to me. I stood apart from them, an island of calm in a sea of frantic energy. "Who called it in?" Officer Miller asked, his voice flat. "I did," I said, stepping forward. "My name is Serena Brooks. My husband is the patient in room 304. Before I could finish my sentence, the door to Julian's room swung open. Julian was being wheeled out in a wheelchair by a nurse, presumably for a CT scan. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of wet ash, and his eyes were bloodshot, but he was awake. The moment he saw the uniforms, a spark of malicious energy seemed to revitalize him. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his hand shaking not just from the drugs, but from a rage that was entirely impotent. Officer Julian croaked, his voice raspy from the intubation tube they had briefly considered using. "Arrest her. She tried to kill me." Patricia rushed to his side, acting as the grieving mother hen protecting her chick. She threw her arms around his shoulders, looking up at the police with wide, pleading eyes. "Thank God you are here," she wailed. "She poisoned him right at the wedding. I saw it. We all saw it. She is unstable, officer. She has been having episodes for weeks. We were going to get her help, but she snapped the detective, a man named Henderson, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, pulled out a notepad. One at a time, he said, holding up a hand. "Sir, are you alleging your wife administered a toxic substance to you?" "Yes," Julian hissed, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. "She put something in my champagne. I took one sip, and everything went black. She's trying to kill me for the insurance money." I watched this performance with a detached fascination. It was almost impressive how quickly they pivoted to the victim narrative. Julian was banking on the classic trope of the hysterical wife. He thought that because he was a man in a tuxedo and I was a woman standing alone, the police would naturally gravitate toward his side of the story. Then came the escalation I had been waiting for, the trap within the trap. Darnell stepped forward. He had recovered from his earlier panic in the hallway and had clearly spent the last 10 minutes formulating a plan that he thought was brilliant. He was holding a large Ziploc bag, the kind used for storing sandwiches, but inside was a shattered champagne flute. "Officer," Darnell said, puffing out his chest and trying to lower his voice to sound authoritative. "I am the brother-in-law. When Julian collapsed, I secured the scene. I knew you guys would need evidence." He held the bag up to the light. The glass inside was broken, but the base was intact and there was a small amount of residue at the bottom. "This is the glass she gave him." Darnell lied, his eyes darting briefly to me before locking onto the detective. I grabbed it off the table before it could get washed. "I guarantee if you run this through your lab, you are going to find whatever poison she used." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. It was so clumsy, so amateur. Darnell thought real life worked like a bad crime drama. He thought handing a bag of broken glass to a cop would be the smoking gun. He didn't understand the concept of chain of custody. He didn't understand that by touching it, moving it, and putting it in a sandwich bag from the hospital cafeteria, he had contaminated it beyond any forensic value. But more importantly, he didn't know which glass was which. Detective Henderson looked at the bag, then at Darnell. "You touched the evidence I had to save it." Darnell insisted, sweat beading on his upper lip. "She would have destroyed it." The detective took the bag, examining it with skepticism. He turned to me. "Ma'am, do you have a response to this? Your family is making some very serious accusations. If what they say is true, I have probable cause to detain you right now." The room went silent. Patricia looked at me with a smirk that was pure venom. Julian leaned forward in his wheelchair, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment they thought I would break. They expected me to scream, to cry, to deny it frantically. They expected the crazy woman they had invented to finally make an appearance. Instead, I unlocked my iPad. I carried this iPad everywhere. It contained the schematics for my latest pharmaceutical patents, my investment portfolios, and today it contained their doom. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I understand why you might be inclined to believe 3 witnesses over 1. However, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially when those witnesses have a financial incentive to see me incarcerated." "Financial incentive?" Patricia squawked. "How dare you?" "We are a respectable family." I ignored her. "Darnell here claims that glass is the one I handed to my husband. He claims he saw me poison it. But there is a problem with his story." I turned the iPad screen toward the detective. "My wedding planner suggested we hire a drone videographer to capture the aerial views of the vineyard," I explained. "It was part of the platinum media package I paid for." The drone was hovering directly above the head table during the toasts to get a cinematic shot of the bride and groom. I tapped the screen. The video player opened. This wasn't the button camera footage from earlier. This was something far more cinematic and far more damning. The footage was breathtakingly high quality, shot in 4K resolution from a bird's eye view. It looked down on the wedding table like the eye of God. You could see the guests, the flowers, the food, and us. I scrubbed the timeline to 5:42 p.m. "Watch closely," I said. On the screen, the top of Julian's head and my veil were clearly visible. The angle provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the table surface and our hands. It was a perspective that no guest, not even those in the front row, could have seen. There, I pointed. In high definition, we watched Julian's hand move. From this angle, the sleight of hand was even more obvious. He didn't just hover over the glass. He clearly uncorked a small vial with his thumb and poured the white powder into the glass on the right. The drone's camera, designed to capture the sparkle of diamonds and champagne bubbles, caught the dust cloud of the powder settling into the drink. The detective leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "And here is the swap I narrated." The drone tracked the movement of the glasses perfectly. It showed me taking the poison glass, the one on the right, with my left hand. It showed me placing Julian's clean glass into my right hand. It showed the crossover. It was a ballet of glasses, undeniable and clear. "But wait," I said. "Look at Darnell." I pointed to the edge of the frame. Darnell was sitting at the adjacent table. At the moment Julian collapsed, the drone captured Darnell rushing forward. But he didn't go for the glass Julian dropped. He went to his own pocket. The footage showed Darnell pulling a handkerchief out of his pocket. He then reached for a completely different glass from a nearby waiter's tray, a glass that had been abandoned by a guest. He wrapped it in the handkerchief and shoved it into his jacket. The detective straightened up his face, hardening. He looked from the screen to Darnell. So the detective said, his voice dropping an octave. "You didn't secure the scene, son. You manufactured one." Darnell started to stammer. No, that is just... The angle is wrong. That is a trick. That is a DJI Mavic 3. Cine drone shooting an Apple ProRes, I said coldly. It doesn't do tricks. It documents reality. I swiped to the next clip. And regarding the glass you just handed the officer, if you run prints on that, you are going to find the fingerprints of whoever that glass belonged to, probably Aunt Mildred from Table 5 and your own. You won't find mine. Because I never touched that glass. I looked at Julian. He had slumped back in his wheelchair, the malicious energy draining out of him as fast as it had arrived. He knew. He knew the drone had seen everything. "Officer," I said, turning back to Miller. "My husband attempted to drug me with a veterinary sedative to induce a psychotic break so he could file for a conservatorship. When his plan backfired and he ingested his own poison, his family conspired to frame me to cover his tracks and his gambling debts." I gestured to the bag in the detective's hand, and that man Darnell Washington just attempted to tamper with evidence and file a false police report in front of 2 law enforcement officers. I believe that is a felony in the state of California. The room felt very small suddenly. The air conditioning hummed, but nobody moved. Patricia looked at the iPad, then at Darnell, and realized there was no shouting her way out of this. The visual evidence was absolute. Detective Henderson handed the bag of broken glass to Officer Miller. "Bag it properly this time," he said, "but label it as evidence of tampering, not poisoning." He turned to Darnell. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "What?" Darnell squeaked. "You can't be serious. She is the one with the money. She paid you off." "Turn around," the detective barked, reaching for his cuffs. As the metal clicked around Darnell's wrists, I watched Julian. He looked small, he looked pathetic, and for the first time since I met him, he looked terrified of me. I stepped closer to his wheelchair, leaning down so our faces were level. The police were busy reading Darnell his rights. Patricia was sobbing into her hands. It was just us. "I told you, Julian," I whispered, my voice soft and terrifyingly calm. "You should have read the prenup." Section 9, Clause C. Any attempt to frame a spouse for a crime results in the immediate forfeiture of all marital assets. I straightened up and looked at the officer. "I would like to press charges," I said, "against all of them." The reality of the situation crashed down on Julian like a tidal wave. I watched the color drain from his face, leaving him looking less like a groom and more like a corpse in a tuxedo. The handcuffs clicking onto Darnell's wrists were the sound of his safety net snapping, but I could see the gears turning in his drug-addled brain. He wasn't just worried about the police or the attempted murder charge. He was worried about something far more immediate and far more dangerous. He was thinking about the money. Julian's eyes darted frantically around the room, bypassing his weeping mother and locking onto Darnell, who was currently being read his Miranda rights by Officer Miller. Julian struggled in his wheelchair, ignoring the nurse who tried to steady him. He hissed through his teeth a desperate sound that was barely audible over the commotion. "Call them," Julian mouthed to Darnell, his eyes wide with terror. "Call the partners. Move the funds. Now." He was trying to be subtle, but subtlety had never been Julian's strong suit. I knew exactly who he was referring to. The partners were a group of unregistered crypto lenders he had borrowed from to cover his initial losses. They were the kind of people who didn't send demand letters. They sent guys with baseball bats. Julian knew that if he was arrested and his accounts were frozen by the state, he wouldn't be able to pay the weekly interest. He needed Darnell to drain our joint account and wire the cash to an offshore wallet before the system locked him out. It was almost cute that he thought he still had that option. I took a step forward, the heels of my bridal shoes clicking sharply on the hospital tile. The sound cut through his panic, drawing his attention to me. I stood directly in his line of sight, blocking his view of Darnell. I held my iPad against my chest, the screen facing him. "Are you looking for this, Julian?" I asked, my voice smooth and conversational, as if asking him if he wanted a glass of water. He glared at me, his lip curling. "Go to hell, Serena." "Darnell." "Don't listen to her. Get the phone, transfer the liquidity." I tapped the screen of my iPad, waking it up. The brightness was set to maximum. I turned it so he could see the banking app dashboard clearly. It was the interface for our joint checking account at Chase Private Client, the account where I deposited my salary and where he deposited his ego. It was the account he had been draining for months to feed his gambling addiction, and the account he was planning to loot completely the moment I was committed to a psych ward. "Look closely, darling," I said, holding the screen inches from his nose. Julian blinked his eyes, trying to focus. He saw the bank logo. He saw the account number ending in 4589. And then he saw the balance, $0.00. He froze. He blinked again hard, as if trying to reboot his vision. He shook his head, a guttural noise of confusion escaping his throat. "No," he stammered. That is a glitch. There was $300,000 in there this morning. I checked. Darnell put the venue refund in there." "It is not a glitch, Julian," I said, swiping to the transaction history. "It is a withdrawal. A very large, very legal withdrawal." I pointed to the line item at the top of the list. It showed a transfer of the entire balance down to the last penny executed exactly 45 minutes ago. The timestamp coincided perfectly with the moment his head hit the table at the wedding reception. "Where is it?" he screamed, forgetting the police, forgetting the hospital staff, forgetting everything but the void where his money used to be. "Where is my money?" "Your money." I laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Julian, you haven't contributed a dime to this marriage in 2 years. That was my money. And now it is back where it belongs." I swiped to the next screen. It was a PDF document. The header read, "Prenuptial Agreement, Addendum B, the Fidelity and Safety Clause." "Do you remember this document?" I asked, zooming in on a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "You signed it 3 years ago. You didn't even read it. You were too busy staring at the Cartier watch I bought you as a signing bonus." Julian squinted at the text, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Let me summarize it for you, since reading legal jargon seems to be above your pay grade," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he and Patricia could hear. "This is what my lawyers call the trigger clause. It is a very special, very aggressive piece of contract law. It states that if one party commits a felony offense against the other party, specifically physical assault, poisoning, or attempted murder, and that offense is documented by credible evidence, the victim has the immediate right to liquidate all joint assets." I leaned in closer, invading his personal space. "It gives me power of attorney over our shared finances instantly to protect the assets from being used for the perpetrator's legal defense." Julian's mouth fell open. He looked at me with horror, the realization sinking in like a stone in deep water. You robbed me," he whispered. "I protected myself," I corrected him. "The moment you collapsed and my drone footage confirmed, you spiked my drink. My automated system sent a signal to the bank. I didn't even have to press a button, Julian. I coded the algorithm myself. The money was wired out of your reach before your body even hit the floor." "But I have debts," he whimpered, the fight draining out of him. "I have people I have to pay. They will kill me, Serena. They will actually kill me." I shrugged, a gesture of indifference that seemed to hurt him more than my anger would have. "Then I suppose you will be safer in prison, won't you?" I said, although I doubt the state provides protection from loan sharks. I watched the panic evolve into despair. He looked at Darnell, who was now being led out of the room by Officer Miller. Darnell looked back, his eyes pleading, mouthing the word money. Julian shook his head slowly. He had nothing. No brother-in-law, no plan, and now absolutely no resources. But I wasn't done. I swiped to the next tab on my iPad. "And Julian, it gets worse," I said. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. What could possibly be worse? I opened the app for the brokerage account, the one where he kept his secret stash, the one he thought I didn't know about, the one where he had leveraged the equity of his parents' house to buy that crypto scam. "I know about the second mortgage, Julian," I said softly. "I know you forged Patricia's signature to get the loan." Patricia, who had been sobbing quietly, stopped abruptly. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide. "What?" she whispered. "What did you say?" I turned the iPad toward Patricia. "He took out a $300,000 home equity line of credit on your house." Patricia, I explained, showing her the digital loan documents. He bet it all on a coin called Moon Rocket. And when that coin crashed to zero last week, the bank called the loan. I looked back at Julian. Since I am now the primary creditor of this family, due to the damages I am claiming for the attempted murder, I bought that debt from the bank this morning. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. You own my parents' mortgage. I smiled. It was the only genuine smile I had given all day. I do, I said. And since you are currently in default, and since the primary borrower you is about to be incarcerated for a violent felony, I am afraid I am going to have to foreclose. Patricia let out a sound that was half scream, half gag. She lunged at Julian, grabbing the lapels of his ruined tuxedo. You told me you paid it off, she shrieked, shaking him violently. You told me the house was safe. My house. My beautiful house. Julian tried to push her away, but he was too weak. Mom, stop. I was going to fix it. I was going to use her trust fund to pay it back. And there it was, the confession, loud and clear. Detective Henderson, who had been standing by the door taking notes, looked up. Did you catch that? I asked the detective without looking away from my husband. He just admitted his motive. He intended to use my trust fund to repay the fraud he committed against his own mother. The detective nodded grimly. We got it, ma'am. I looked down at Julian one last time. He was weeping now, broken and small, being shook by his mother who cared more about her real estate than her son's freedom. You wanted to live a life of luxury, Julian, I said. You wanted the big house, the fast cars, the rich wife. You wanted it so badly, you were willing to drug me to keep it. Well, now you have nothing. No money, no house, no wife, just a plastic bag with your personal effects, and a very long time to think about the chemistry of consequences. I turned off the iPad and slipped it back into my clutch. I turned to the nurse who had been watching the entire scene with her hand over her mouth. Nurse, I said politely, I believe my husband is ready for his CT scan now. You might want to hurry. Stress is bad for his blood pressure. As I walked out of the room, leaving the screaming mother and the sobbing son behind me, I checked my banking app one last time. The transfer had cleared. The funds were safe in a Swiss trust that no Brooks would ever touch again. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt efficient. The balance sheet was corrected. The liability was removed. And now it was time to close the account permanently. The sound of Julian's sobbing was a pathetic wet noise that seemed to fill the small hospital room, but my attention had shifted. I was watching Darnell. He was standing near the door, his wrists bound in stainless steel, flanked by Officer Miller. For the last 10 minutes, Darnell had been watching the destruction of the Brooks family dynasty with wide, terrified eyes. He had watched Julian confess. He had watched me liquidate the bank accounts. He had watched the foreclosure notice drop on Patricia. And now I could see the wheels turning in his head. Darnell was a survivor. He was a bottom feeder, the kind of creature that attaches itself to the biggest shark in the ocean to eat the scraps. For years, Julian had been that shark. But now Julian was bleeding out in the water, and Darnell realized he was attached to a corpse. He needed a new host. Darnell shifted his weight, trying to make himself look smaller, less threatening. The bluster and arrogance he had displayed in the hallway were gone, replaced by a slimy, desperate ingratiation. He looked at Julian, who was currently hyperventilating in his wheelchair, and then he looked at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He decided to gamble on the idea that I was a benevolent, forgiving woman. He decided to bet that I was stupid enough to believe him. Serena Darnell called out, his voice cracking slightly. He tried to step toward me, but Officer Miller held him back. Wait, just wait a second. Can I talk to you? Just for a minute? I turned slowly, giving him the same look one might give a cockroach that had just scurried across the kitchen counter. I do not think we have anything to talk about, Darnell, I said. Unless you want to discuss the $50,000 you owe me. No, it is not about that, Darnell stammered, shaking his head vigorously. Look, you have got this all wrong. I am not with them. I mean, I am family, but I am not like them. He jerked his head toward Julian and Patricia. I knew he had issues. Serena. Darnell continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I told him. I swear to God, I told him this was a bad idea. I said, Julian, man, you cannot do this to your wife. She is a good woman. She has been nothing but good to us. But he wouldn't listen. He is crazy, Serena. You saw the test results. He is on drugs. He forced me to go along with it. I stared at him, genuinely amazed by the audacity. 5 minutes ago, he was handing a bag of broken glass to a detective to frame me for attempted murder. Now he was painting himself as the moral compass of the operation. He forced you. I repeated, my tone flat. Yes. Darnell nodded enthusiastically. He threatened me. He said if I didn't help him get the conservatorship, he would ruin me. He said he would tell Vanessa about some financial trouble I was having. I was scared, Serena. I was just trying to protect my family. You know how it is. You do crazy things for family. From the wheelchair, Julian lifted his head. His face was a mask of betrayal. You lying snake, Julian rasped. It was your idea. You found the vet. You told me about the prenup clause. Shut up, junkie, Darnell shouted back, his face twisting into a sneer. Don't try to drag me down with you. I am a businessman. I have a reputation in this town. Serena knows who the real villain is here. He turned his eyes back to me, softening his expression into something he probably thought looked sincere. Serena, please. You are a smart woman. You run a big company. You know how to spot a bad investment. Julian is a bad investment. But me, I can help you. I can testify against him. I can tell the police everything he planned. I can be your star witness. Just tell these officers it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I was working undercover for you or something. We can work this out, family to family. I let a small, cold smile play on my lips. It was fascinating to watch a man strip himself of his dignity so completely. He was willing to sell out his brother-in-law, his drinking buddy, his partner in crime, just to avoid a night in jail. You are right, Darnell, I said softly. I do know how to spot a bad investment. Darnell beamed, thinking he had hooked me. Exactly. See, officer? She gets it. We are cool. I stepped closer to him. I looked him up and down, taking in the flashy suit that was a size too small, the fake Rolex on his wrist, and the car keys dangling from his belt loop. Speaking of investments, Darnell, I said, that is a lovely car you drove here today. I saw it in the parking lot when the ambulance arrived. A Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT, wasn't it matte black wrap, custom rims, very aggressive. Darnell blinked, confused by the sudden change of subject, but he nodded eagerly. Yeah, that is my baby. Just got it last week. It shows clients, I mean business, you know. In real estate, image is everything. It is a beautiful machine. I agreed. $180,000 if I recall the sticker price correctly. Darnell puffed out his chest, forgetting for a second that he was in handcuffs. Yeah, well, you gotta spend money to make money, right? Right, I said. But Darnell, looking at your tax returns, which I have access to because Julian foolishly linked them to our family trust for tax benefits, you declared an income of $32,000 last year. Darnell's smile faltered. So I continued, my voice hardening. I was curious how you afforded the lease payments on a car that costs more than your annual salary. So while the doctors were pumping Julian's stomach, I ran a quick search on the license plate. Darnell swallowed hard. The sweat on his forehead was coming back. It turns out, I said, leaning in so close I could smell his cheap cologne. That car is not leased in your name, Darnell. It is a corporate lease. Yeah, so, Darnell stammered. It is a company car. Julian's company. He let me use it. He is the CEO. He gave me permission. Correct, I said. It is leased to JB Capital Holdings, Julian's shell company, the same company he used to hide his crypto losses. I paused, letting the silence stretch out. I looked at Officer Miller, then back at Darnell. But here is the problem, Darnell. As I explained to Julian a moment ago, due to the activation of the trigger clause in our prenup, combined with the forfeiture of assets due to his felony attempt on my life, JB Capital Holdings no longer belongs to Julian. Darnell's eyes went wide. I seized the company assets 12 minutes ago, I said. I am now the sole owner and managing director of JB Capital Holdings. And as the new owner, I have been reviewing the inventory. I pulled my phone out and tapped the screen once. I do not recall authorizing a company vehicle for a non-employee, I said. In fact, I just reported that specific vehicle stolen. Stolen, Darnell squeaked. His voice was so high it cracked. No, wait, you can't do that. I have the keys. Julian gave them to me. Julian has no authority. I snapped, my voice sharp as a whip. Julian is a criminal suspect with zero equity. The car belongs to me. And you, Darnell, are currently in possession of a stolen vehicle valued at nearly $200,000. That is grand theft auto. That is a felony. I turned to Officer Miller. Officer, I believe you will find the keys to my stolen vehicle on his belt. I would like to press charges for the theft as well. And since he used that stolen vehicle to transport an accomplice to a crime scene, I believe you can add using a vehicle in the commission of a felony to his list of charges. Officer Miller looked at Darnell with a mixture of pity and professional weariness. He reached down and snatched the keys from Darnell's belt loop. Is this true, ma'am? Miller asked. You own the company that holds the title. I held up my phone displaying the digital transfer of ownership certificate I had just received from my legal team. It is all right here, officer. The paperwork is filed. He is driving my car without my permission. Darnell looked at me, and for the first time he realized the true extent of his mistake. He hadn't just angered a family member. He had declared war on a woman who treated real life like a chessboard. Serena. Please, Darnell wailed, struggling against the cuffs. I didn't know. I will give it back. I will drive it to your house right now. I do not want it back, Darnell, I said coldly. It smells like desperation and cheap cologne. I will have it sold at auction to cover a fraction of the money you owe me. Officer Miller tightened his grip on Darnell's arm. Let's go, Mr. Washington. You have a lot of explaining to do downtown. As they dragged him out of the room, Darnell was still screaming, begging Julian to say something, begging me to have mercy. But Julian was slumped in his chair, staring at the floor, broken. I watched Darnell disappear down the hallway. He had wanted to ride in style. Now he would be riding in the back of a squad car. It was a downgrade, certainly, but at least the police car had legitimate branding. I turned back to the empty room. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a battlefield after the cannons had stopped firing. I had won. But the war wasn't over. There was still the matter of the press, the public, and the rest of my life. But first, I needed to make sure the world knew exactly who had won. The silence in the waiting room after Darnell was dragged away was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a natural disaster, the quiet moment when the survivors look around at the wreckage and try to comprehend the scale of the destruction. Julian had been wheeled away for his scan, accompanied by a police officer who looked less than thrilled to be guarding a man in a tuxedo who smelled of vomit and failure. That left just two of us. Me standing tall in my ruined wedding dress, and Patricia, the matriarch of the Brooks family, who was currently watching her dynasty crumble into dust. Patricia stood by the window, her back to me. Her shoulders were shaking. For a moment, a naive observer might have thought she was weeping for her son, crying because her child was facing a decade in prison. But I knew Patricia. I knew that she was incapable of feeling pain for anyone other than herself. She wasn't crying for Julian. She was trembling with the terrified realization that her social calendar was about to be obliterated. She turned to face me slowly. Her face was a ruin of expensive cosmetics. The foundation had cracked, the mascara had run, and her lips were pale and trembling. She looked at me not with anger anymore, but with a desperate, clawing need. She realized that I held all the cards. I held the money, I held the evidence, and most importantly, I held the narrative. Serena, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, my face impassive. You cannot do this, she continued, taking a shaky step toward me. You cannot let them take him away. You cannot press charges. Think about what this will do to us. Think about the family name. The family name, I repeated, testing the words on my tongue like a bad wine. You mean the name that Darnell was using to defraud investors? The name Julian used to secure illegal loans? Or the name you used to bully the catering staff at my wedding this morning? Patricia flinched, as if I had slapped her again. We have a reputation in Greenwich, she pleaded, wringing her hands together. The garden club, the historical society. If this gets out, if people find out my son is a criminal, I will be ruined. We will be pariahs. No one will invite us anywhere. I almost laughed. Even now, facing the total destruction of her family, her primary concern was her standing in the local garden club. It was pathologically narcissistic. "We can fix this," Patricia said, her voice gaining a frantic speed. "We can tell the police it was a mistake, a medical reaction, an allergy. Yes, we can say Julian had an allergic reaction to the seafood and became delirious. We can say Darnell was just confused. We can make this go away, Serena. We have connections." She reached out, trying to take my hand. Her fingers were cold and clammy. "Do it for the love you had for him," she begged, her eyes wide and wet. "You loved him once, didn't you? You stood at that altar today and promised to love him for better or worse. Well, this is the worst, Serena. This is where a wife stands by her husband. You owe him that. You owe us that. We are family." I looked down at her hand, touching mine. I felt nothing but revulsion. She was trying to weaponize the vows that her son had violated before the ink was even dry on the marriage license. She was trying to use the concept of family to protect a man who had tried to drug me into a coma. I pulled my hand away slowly, wiping it on the side of my dress. "I do not think you understand the situation, Patricia," I said, my voice calm and low. "There is no fixing this. There is no story you can spin. There is no allergic reaction that explains a syringe of ketamine and a video of him pouring it into my drink." "But no one has to know," she hissed, her desperation turning aggressive. "The police can be discreet. If you drop the charges, the district attorney will let it go. We can send Julian to a private rehab in Switzerland. We can say he is exhausted. We can keep this quiet. Please, Serena, for the dignity of the family." "Dignity," I said. "That is an interesting word coming from a woman who just tried to slap me in a hospital hallway." I turned away from her and walked toward the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall of the waiting room. It was currently playing a muted daytime soap opera, a fitting backdrop for the drama unfolding in the room. I picked up the remote control from the side table. "You want to keep this quiet, Patricia?" I asked, my thumb hovering over the power button. "You want to save the family reputation? You want to pretend that your son is just a tired businessman and not a predator?" "Yes," Patricia cried. "Yes, exactly. We just need time to manage the narrative." I looked at her one last time, a look of pity mixed with finality. "I am afraid it is a little late for damage control," I said. I pressed the button. The channel changed. I keyed in the number for the national news network. The volume was already up. The breaking news graphic flashed across the screen in urgent red and white colors. The ticker at the bottom was moving fast. I watched Patricia's face as she looked at the screen. I watched the blood drain out of her, completely leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under heat. On the screen, the anchor woman was looking serious, a graphic behind her showing a photo of Julian and me from our engagement shoot, a photo I had provided to the press kit. "Breaking news this hour," the anchor announced, her voice grave. "A shocking scene at a high society wedding in Napa Valley today. Julian Brooks, a self-proclaimed crypto financier and son of Greenwich socialite Patricia Brooks, has been arrested and hospitalized after allegedly attempting to poison his new bride, biotech heiress Serena Brooks, during their wedding toast." Patricia let out a strangled sound, her hands flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." But the news report wasn't done. "We have received exclusive footage from the event," the anchor continued. "Warning to our viewers, the following images may be disturbing." And there it was, my drone footage. I had sent the raw file to the major news desks exactly 60 minutes ago, right after I called the police. I knew the news cycle. I knew they were hungry for a Gone Girl-style story involving rich people behaving badly. I gave it to them on a silver platter. The entire nation watched as Julian poured the powder. They watched the swap. They watched him collapse. It was playing on a loop analyzed by a legal expert in a split screen. "It appears to be a clear case of premeditated assault," the legal analyst on TV was saying. "The video evidence is damning, and sources close to the investigation say the motive was financial. Julian Brooks was reportedly under investigation for securities fraud and was attempting to seize control of his wife's fortune through a conservatorship." Patricia staggered back, hitting the wall. She slid down slowly, her legs giving out. She stared at the screen, watching her son's face, watching her own name scroll across the ticker. Socialite Patricia Brooks, questioned by police, family in disgrace. Her phone began to ring in her purse. Then it beeped. Then it rang again. A cacophony of notifications erupted from her handbag. "It is your friends from the garden club, Patricia," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the television. "And probably the Historical Society. And I imagine the country club board of directors is calling to inform you that your membership has been revoked pending an investigation. They are very strict about criminal associations, aren't they?" Patricia looked at her bag as if it contained a bomb. She didn't answer it. She couldn't. She knew that every call was a door slamming in her face. Every text message was a friend cutting ties. Why, she whispered, looking up at me from the floor. "Why did you do this? Why did you humiliate us like this?" I walked over to her, towering above her slumped form. "I didn't humiliate you, Patricia," I said. "I just turned on the lights. You and your son have been living in the dark, thinking you could lie, cheat, and steal without consequences. You thought because you wore designer clothes and lived in a big house, the rules didn't apply to you. You thought you could treat me like a prop, a bank account with a pulse." I gestured to the TV screen where a reporter was now standing live outside the vineyard, interviewing a shocked guest. "You wanted to be famous," I said. "You always complained that the papers didn't cover your charity luncheons enough. Well, look at you now. You are the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. You are famous, Patricia. You finally got what you wanted." On the television, the business correspondent cut in. "In related news, the arrest has triggered a massive sell-off in JB Capital Holdings. The company, which was revealed to be a shell entity managed by Mr. Brooks, has been declared effectively insolvent. Investors are panicking as rumors circulate that client funds were misappropriated to fund the lavish wedding and cover personal gambling debts." Patricia sobbed a raw, ugly sound. The financial ruin was one thing, but the public shame was the final nail in the coffin. She was a woman who defined her existence by how others perceived her. And now the entire world perceived her as the mother of a monster, a failed socialite who raised a fraud. I looked at the TV one last time. The anchor was moving on to the weather, but the damage was done. The footage was on the internet now. It would be shared, retweeted, and analyzed forever. Julian Brooks would be the face of incompetence and malice for the rest of his life. I picked up my clutch and checked my own phone. My inbox was full of messages from my board of directors at Vanguard Biocorp. They were supportive. They were impressed. My stock was actually up 2 points. The market likes a strong leader who eliminates liabilities ruthlessly. I looked down at Patricia. "I suggest you answer the phone," I said. "It might be the bank. They are probably watching the news too, and they will want the keys to the house by morning." I turned and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back at the television. I didn't look back at the woman on the floor. I walked out of the waiting room, leaving the Brooks family to drown in the flood they had started. I had a company to run, and I was done playing the victim. "You are insane," Julian screamed, straining against the restraint straps of the wheelchair. The sedative was fighting a losing battle against his sheer, unadulterated rage. He looked like a rabid animal foaming at the mouth, his tuxedo shirt torn open where the defibrillator pads had been placed earlier. "You are just a lab manager," he bellowed, his voice echoing down the hospital corridor, drawing stares from nurses and patients alike. "You wash beakers for a living, Serena. You make $60,000 a year. You check inventory lists and order rat food. How dare you steal my company? How dare you touch my accounts? You are a nobody, a glorified assistant." He was projecting his own insecurity so loudly it was almost deafening. For 3 years, Julian had built his entire self-worth on the idea that he was the provider, the genius financier, and I was the simple academic wife who needed his guidance. He needed me to be small so he could feel big. The idea that I had the power to seize his assets was breaking his brain. It simply did not compute with the reality he had constructed. I stood there, smoothing the silk of my dress, watching him unravel. I didn't interrupt. I let him scream. I let him pour out every ounce of his misogyny and elitism. "Who do you think you are?" He spat, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "You think because you have a little inheritance you can play with the big boys. I deal with hedge funds. Serena, I deal with venture capital. You deal with petri dishes. When I get out of here, I am going to sue you for every penny. I will have you fired from that miserable little lab job before the sun comes up." The elevator doors at the end of the hallway dinged softly. It was a polite, expensive sound. The doors slid open and a man stepped out. He was wearing a navy blue bespoke suit that cost more than Julian's car. He carried a leather briefcase that smelled of Italian craftsmanship and victory. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his presence commanded immediate attention. It was Richard Sterling, the most feared corporate litigator in New York City, the man whose name made CEOs sweat and board members resign. Julian stopped screaming. His mouth hung open. He recognized Richard. Everyone in the finance world recognized Richard. He was the shark you hired when you wanted to eat the other sharks. Richard Julian gasped, a flicker of delusional hope lighting up his eyes. Oh, thank God. Richard Sterling. Did my mother call you? Thank God. You have to help me. This woman, this crazy woman, she stole my company. She hacked my accounts. You have to stop her. Julian tried to reach out a shaking hand toward the lawyer. He thought his mother had pulled a miracle. He thought the cavalry had arrived to save the promising young businessman from the evil wife. Richard walked down the hallway. He didn't look at Julian. He didn't even blink in Julian's direction. He walked past the wheelchair as if it were a piece of discarded hospital furniture. He stopped directly in front of me. He set his briefcase down on the shiny floor, straightened his tie, and bowed his head slightly. It wasn't a bow of subservience. It was a bow of profound professional respect. Good evening, Madame Chairman. Richard said, his voice deep and smooth. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. Julian blinked. Madame? What? Richard ignored him. I have the injunction papers you requested, Madam Chairman. The board of directors has been briefed. They voted unanimously to support your motion. We have successfully frozen all assets connected to Mr. Brooks, including the offshore accounts he thought were hidden in the Cayman Islands. The forensic accountants are already scrubbing the servers at JB Capital. Julian looked from Richard to me, his head whipping back and forth like a spectator at a tennis match. Chairman Julian whispered, Why? Why is he calling you chairman? You are a lab manager. You work at Vanguard Biocorp. I finally looked at Julian. I stepped closer, looking down at him with a pitying smile. Oh, Julian, I said softly, I do not work at Vanguard Biocorp. I am Vanguard Biocorp. He stared at me, his eyes losing focus. My father founded the company 40 years ago, I explained, keeping my voice conversational. When he passed away 5 years ago, I inherited 51% of the voting stock. I am the majority shareholder. I am the chairwoman of the board. But you go to the lab every day, he stammered. You wear a white coat. You complain about your boss, Dr. Aris. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. Dr. Aris is the chief scientific officer. He answers to me. And yes, I go to the lab every day because I am a scientist, Julian. I love the work. I wanted to understand every level of my company from the ground up. I didn't want to be a figurehead who sat in a glass office. So I created the persona of a mid-level manager. It was a test. A test, he breathed. A test for people like you, I said. I wanted to know who would love Serena the scientist, not Serena the heiress. I wanted to know who would respect me for my mind, not my portfolio. I leaned in closer, my face inches from his. And you failed, Julian. Spectacularly. He shook his head, denial still clinging to him like a sickness. No, that is impossible. I pitched to Vanguard last month. I pitched my crypto fund to the investment committee, I know, I said. I was in the room. His eyes went wide. No, you weren't. I would have seen you. I was on the conference call, Julian, I said. I was the silent listener on the line. I heard your pitch. I heard you try to sell my vice presidents on a Ponzi scheme wrapped in blockchain buzzwords. I straightened up, crossing my arms. And do you want to know who rejected your application? It wasn't the committee, it was me. I sent the memo. Project lacks fundamental value. Founder is a liability. That was my review of you, Julian. I rejected your loan application personally last Tuesday. Julian looked like he had been punched in the gut. The realization was physically painful for him. The faceless corporate bureaucracy that had denied him funding wasn't faceless at all. It was the woman he slept next to every night, the woman he mocked at dinner parties. Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a sleek glass vial. It was sealed in an evidence bag. "The police recovered this from your jacket pocket, Mr. Brooks," Richard said, holding it up. I took the bag from Richard. I held it up to the light. The label was small, printed in clinical font. "Do you recognize this logo, Julian?" I asked, pointing to the stylized V and B intertwined on the label. He stared at it, his breathing shallow. "That is the Vanguard logo," I said. I turned the bottle so he could read the fine print. "Proprietary compound VB782, for veterinary use only. Manufactured by Vanguard Biocorp, San Diego facility." A dark, ironic smile spread across my face. "You really are a terrible businessman, Julian," I said. "You didn't even do your due diligence on the murder weapon." I tapped the glass with my fingernail. Clink, clink. "You tried to drug me with a compound manufactured by my own subsidiary," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "You stole a product from my company to use against the owner of that company." I leaned down, whispering the final blow directly into his ear. "Did you really think you could use my own science against me, Julian? You never read the contracts, and apparently you never read the bottle either. I know the antidote because I hold the patent on the poison." Julian made a choking sound. He looked at the bottle, then at me, and finally the magnitude of his stupidity crushed him. He wasn't just beaten, he was owned. He had tried to play God in a universe where I wrote the laws of physics. Richard stepped forward, checking his watch. "The press release has gone out, Madam Chairman," he said. "The stock price is actually up in after-hours trading. The market appreciates your decisiveness in handling external threats." "Excellent," I said, handing the evidence bag back to him. I looked at Julian one last time. "Goodbye, Julian. My lawyers will send the divorce papers to your cell. I will make sure they use simple words so you can understand them." I turned on my heel and walked toward the elevator, Richard flanking me like a Secret Service agent. Behind me, Julian let out one last long scream of despair, a sound that was music to my ears. I stepped into the elevator, the doors slid shut, and I ascended, leaving the debris of my marriage on the ground floor where it belonged. The elevator doors were just beginning to glide shut when a high-pitched shriek echoed down the sterile hospital corridor, causing the metal doors to bounce back open. It was a sound I recognized instantly. It was the sound of a spoiled child being denied a toy, or in this case, a 30-year-old woman realizing her access to unearned wealth had just been cut off. Vanessa, my sister-in-law, came sprinting around the corner. She was still wearing her bridesmaid dress, a shimmering champagne gown that I had paid for, though she had complained incessantly that the color washed her out. She was clutching her designer handbag in one hand and a crumpled receipt in the other. Her face was flushed, her mascara smudged, and she looked like a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She ignored her mother, who was still slumped on the floor weeping. She ignored the empty wheelchair where her brother had just been sitting. She ignored the fact that her husband, Darnell, was nowhere to be seen. Her eyes locked onto me with laser focus, fueled by the panic of a consumer whose credit limit had just hit a brick wall. "Serena," she screamed, storming toward the elevator. "What did you do? What did you do to the accounts?" She waved the crumpled paper in my face. It was a receipt from the hospital gift shop. "I tried to buy a bottle of water and a magazine," she yelled, her voice trembling with indignation. "A $6 transaction. And it was declined. The machine said, 'Call issuer.' I tried the Amex. I tried the Visa. I even tried the emergency debit card Julian gave me for gas. All of them declined." I looked at her standing there in her expensive gown, having a meltdown over a declined transaction, while her brother was facing felony charges and her husband was in the back of a squad car. The Brooks family priorities were truly a marvel of modern psychology. "Vanessa," I said, stepping out of the elevator to face her, "I suggest you lower your voice. You are disturbing the patients." "I don't care about the patients," she screeched, stamping her foot like a toddler. "I care about my money." "Fix it, Serena. Call the bank. You are the one with the passwords now, aren't you?" Julian said. "You handle the admin. Unfreeze my cards right now. I have a spa appointment tomorrow. I have bills to pay." I looked at Richard Sterling, my lawyer, who was watching Vanessa, with a look of mild amusement. He adjusted his cufflink, waiting for my signal. "Vanessa," I said calmly, "those aren't your cards." "Excuse me," she snapped. My name is on the plastic. Your name is on the plastic, but the liability is on the corporate entity, I explained, keeping my voice slow and simple, as if explaining quantum physics to a golden retriever. Julian issued those cards to you as authorized user extensions of JB Capital Holdings. He told the tax authorities you were a consultant, so he could write off your shopping sprees as business expenses. So what she huffed, "It is still my money." "No, Vanessa," I said, "it was never your money. It was embezzled client funds funneled into a corporate account that is now under federal investigation. And since I just seized the company assets to recoup my losses, those cards are now just worthless pieces of plastic." Her jaw dropped. She looked at the cards in her hand as if they had suddenly turned into snakes. But I have payments set up," she stammered. "My apartment lease? My car note. They draw automatically tomorrow." "I am afraid you are going to have to find a new way to pay for your lifestyle," I said. "Perhaps you could get a job. I hear the hospital cafeteria is hiring dishwashers." Vanessa let out a strangled cry of rage. "You can't do this! You can't just cut us off! That is financial abuse!" I laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound. "Financial abuse," I repeated. "Financial abuse is your brother trying to drug me to steal my inheritance. Financial abuse is your husband skimming $50,000 from my accounts. What I am doing, Vanessa, is simply closing the bank of Serena." Patricia, who had managed to pull herself up from the floor, hobbled over to join her daughter. She looked like a ghost of her former self, but the mention of assets seemed to revive a spark of her old greed. "The house," Patricia croaked, clutching Vanessa's arm for support. You said you own the mortgage." I turned my gaze to my mother-in-law. "I do," I confirmed. "Julian used the deed to your house as collateral for a high-risk loan. When he defaulted, the lender put the debt up for sale. I bought it. But it is my house," Patricia wailed. "My name is on the title, and Julian's name is on the loan you co-signed," I reminded her. "A loan that is now in default. But it is not just the house, Patricia." I turned back to Vanessa. "You mentioned your apartment. The one in the city." Vanessa went pale. "What about it?" "Julian listed it as a secondary asset to secure the liquidity for his trading platform," I said, enjoying the look of horror dawning on her face. "And Darnell's Porsche. That was company property, and this wedding dress you are wearing," I reached out and flicked the fabric of her gown. "He put this on the company credit line too," I said. "In fact, pretty much everything you people own, wear, or drive is technically collateral for the massive debt Julian owes me." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a steely whisper. "So when I say I am the creditor, I mean I own it all. The roof over your head, the wheels under your feet, the clothes on your back, it is all mine. And frankly, I am not in a charitable mood." Vanessa looked like she was going to be sick. She looked down at her dress, then at her mother, realizing that the safety net she had lived on her entire life had just been incinerated. "You are a monster," Vanessa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We are family. How can you throw us out on the street?" "I didn't throw you out," I said coldly. "Your brother gambled you out. He bet your future on a coin flip and lost. I just collected the winnings." Patricia began to sob loudly, a wailing sound that finally drew the attention of the hospital security staff. 2 large guards in uniform came jogging down the hallway, looking concerned. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" the lead guard asked, looking at the hysterical women and then at me. Patricia pointed at me, her hand shaking. "She is harassing us. She is threatening us. Throw her out." The guard looked at me. He hesitated. He recognized the tone of authority in my stance, the expensive suit of my lawyer, and the sheer calmness of my demeanor compared to the chaos of the Brooks women. "Actually," I said, smiling politely at the guard, "I believe these 2 women are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Vanessa shrieked. "My brother is a patient here. The patient has been transferred to the custodial ward under police guard," I informed her. "And as for you 2, you have no medical reason to be here. You are causing a disturbance." I turned to the guard, pulling a small, elegant business card from my clutch. "My name is Serena Brooks," I said, handing him the card. "I am the CEO of Vanguard Biocorp. You might recognize the name on the plaque in the lobby. I donated the funds for the new pediatric wing last year. I also sit on the board of directors for this hospital group." The guard took the card. His eyes widened as he read it. He looked up at me, his posture instantly straightening into a salute of respect. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice dropping to a deferential tone. "I apologize. I didn't recognize you." "It is quite all right," I said. "It has been a long day, but I would appreciate it if you could escort these individuals off the premises. They are distressing the staff, and quite frankly, they are distressing me." The guard nodded sharply. He turned to Patricia and Vanessa, his face hard. "Ladies, you need to leave. Now." But, Patricia stammered, looking from the guard to me. "Let's go," the guard said, stepping forward to shepherd them away. "Or I will have to call the police for a trespassing citation. And I believe you have had enough trouble with the police today." Vanessa looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with hate and fear. I saw the realization hit her. She wasn't just broke, she was powerless. In the world, she worshipped the world of money and status. She was now a refugee, and I was the queen who had just exiled her. I watched as the security guards escorted them down the hallway. Patricia was still crying about her house. Vanessa was trying to call someone on her phone, likely a friend who wouldn't answer. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They looked exactly like what they were, greedy people who had finally run out of other people's money. I turned back to Richard Sterling. He held the elevator door open for me, a rare smile playing on his lips. "That was efficient, Madam Chairman," he said. I stepped into the elevator, smoothing my dress. "Just cleaning house." "Richard," I said, as the doors closed, shutting out the last echoes of the Brooks family drama. "Now take me to the office. I have a company to run, and I believe I am due for a very large bonus this quarter." The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a decompression chamber. With every floor we descended, the pressure in my chest lightened. The toxic atmosphere of the third floor, heavy with the stench of betrayal and desperation, was left behind. Beside me, Richard Sterling stood in comfortable silence, the kind shared by two professionals who have just successfully executed a complex operation. When the doors slid open, the air in the main lobby felt different. It was crisp. It was clean. It was the air of a life that finally belonged solely to me. I walked toward the automatic sliding doors, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the polished granite. As I passed the reception desk, I stopped. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond on my ring finger was massive, a 4-carat solitaire that Julian had insisted on. Of course, I later learned he had paid for it using a credit card he opened in my name without my knowledge. For 3 years, that ring had felt heavy. It had felt like a promise of partnership, but in reality, it was a shackle. It was a glittering symbol of the lie I had been living. To my right, a member of the cleaning staff was changing the bag in a large red bin marked for medical waste. It was destined for the incinerator, filled with used bandages, latex gloves, and other biological hazards that were deemed unsafe for the general public. I slid the ring off my finger. The metal felt cold against my skin. I didn't look at it with nostalgia. I didn't feel a pang of lost love. I looked at it for what it was, a contaminant, a piece of hazardous material that had poisoned my life for too long. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed the ring into the red bin. It landed with a dull thud among the biohazard bags. "Excuse me," Miss the cleaner said, his eyes widening. "You dropped your—" "No," I interrupted him, offering a small, polite smile. "I didn't drop it. I disposed of it. Please make sure it is incinerated with the rest of the trash." I turned back to the exit, just as the elevator doors behind me opened again. The chaos had spilled down to the lobby. 2 police officers were escorting Julian out. He was no longer in the wheelchair. He was walking, stumbling, really his hands cuffed behind his back, his tuxedo jacket falling off his shoulders. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours. When he saw me standing by the door, the dam broke. "Serena," he screamed, straining against the officer's grip. "Serena, don't leave me. We can fix this. I love you. Please, baby. I love you." His voice was raw, scratching against the acoustics of the high ceiling. People in the waiting area turned to stare. Mothers covered their children's eyes. It was a pathetic display. This was the man who had chuckled about drugging me. This was the man who had planned to lock me away in a mental institution. And now he was begging for the very mercy he had refused to show me. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even turn my head. I simply adjusted my silk wrap and walked through the sliding doors into the cool night air. Behind me, I heard a thud and a commotion. "She is down," someone shouted. "We need a gurney." It was Patricia. I didn't need to look to know. She had likely fainted, overwhelmed by the reality that her social life was ending in the back of a police cruiser. It wasn't a fake faint this time. It was the physiological shutdown of a woman whose ego had been severed from her life support. The doctors would take care of her, or maybe they wouldn't. She didn't have insurance anymore after all. Outside, the scene was bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers, but the most satisfying light came from the orange strobe of a tow truck. In the middle of the ambulance bay, Darnell's precious Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT, my Porsche, legally speaking, was being hoisted into the air. The matte black paint, which he thought made him look like a rap star, looked dull under the streetlights. Darnell was already in the back of a squad car parked nearby. His face was pressed against the window, his breath fogging up the glass. He was watching his status symbol, his identity dangling from a hook. He saw me standing on the sidewalk, flanked by my lawyer. He started banging on the glass, shouting something I couldn't hear, but I could read his lips. "My car. My car." I looked at the tow truck driver, a burly man with a clipboard. "Take it to the impound lot," I instructed him, my voice carrying clearly over the siren noise, "and tell them to sell it for parts. I don't want anyone else driving a vehicle that has been tainted by such mediocrity." The driver nodded, tipping his cap. "You got it, lady." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the night air. It smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like victory. Richard opened the door to his waiting town car. "Where to?" "Madam Chairman," he asked. I looked back at the hospital one last time. I looked at the flashing lights, the screaming husband, the fainting mother, the towed car. It was a perfect portrait of destruction, and I had painted it with a single stroke of truth. "The airport, Richard," I said, sliding into the leather seat. "I believe the Vanguard private jet is fueled and waiting. I have a board meeting in Paris on Monday, and I have wasted enough time on these people. 6 months have passed since that night at the hospital, but looking out at the Eiffel Tower from my balcony, it feels like a lifetime ago. The morning sun in Paris is different than in Greenwich. It is brighter, it is sharper, it doesn't hide anything." I sat at my bistro table sipping an espresso and scrolling through the briefing documents for the upcoming merger. My phone buzzed with an email notification from Richard Sterling. The subject line was simple, "Final sentencing update." I opened it. The trial of the people versus Julian Brooks had concluded yesterday. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. The video evidence from the drone combined with the audio recording from the library had made the defense attorney's job impossible. Julian had tried to plead insanity, claiming the stress of the wedding had caused a psychotic break. But the prosecution, armed with my testimony and the timeline of his premeditated financial crimes, tore that defense apart. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder in the second degree, wire fraud, securities fraud, grand larceny. The judge, a woman who clearly had no patience for men who poison their wives, had thrown the book at him. Julian was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole for the first 8. I took a sip of my coffee. 10 years. He would be 44 when he got out. He would have missed the prime of his life. He would have missed the technology shifts, the market trends, the world moving on without him. He wanted to control time, to freeze me in a state of incapacity so he could play king. Now time would be his only companion, ticking away slowly in a 6x8 cell. I scrolled down to the section about the rest of the clan. Darnell had taken a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Julian regarding the crypto scheme, he received a lighter sentence of 18 months for the auto theft and accessory charges. But the real punishment wasn't the jail time, it was the divorce. Vanessa had left him the moment the money dried up, but Vanessa and Patricia weren't doing much better. The foreclosure on the colonial house had gone through in record time. I had sold the property to a developer who planned to bulldoze it and build modern condos. I found that poetic. The monument to their pretension was being razed to the ground. According to Richard's report, Patricia and Vanessa were currently sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex near the interstate, miles away from their beloved country club. Patricia was reportedly working as a greeter at a discount department store. I imagined her standing under the harsh fluorescent lights, forced to smile at people she used to look down on, clutching her fake handbag, realizing that this was not a temporary setback. This was her new reality. I set the phone down. People often ask me if I feel guilty. They ask if it was too harsh to take everything. They ask if I could have just divorced him and walked away. But they don't understand the nature of the infection. Julian didn't just want my money. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to turn me into a ghost in my own life, a medicated shell that he could parade around while he spent the fortune my father built. He wanted to take my mind, my autonomy, my very self. When someone tries to take your soul, you don't just slap their hand. You burn their world down to ensure they never have the resources to strike a match again. I stood up and walked to the railing of the balcony. The city of Paris was waking up below me. I had a company to run. I had thousands of employees who depended on my leadership. I had new drugs to develop, cures to find, a legacy to build. I was Serena Brooks, the chairwoman of Vanguard Biocorp. I was not a victim. I was not a survivor. I was the architect of my own fate. Julian wanted a wife who would obediently drink from the glass he handed her. He wanted a woman who would close her eyes and swallow the poison with a smile. He got exactly what he asked for. I drank in the moment. I smiled. I played the part perfectly until the curtain fell. The only difference was I made sure he was the one who choked on the ending. If this story of absolute vindication gave you the satisfaction you were looking for, hit that like button right now. I want to know what you think. What was the moment that made you cheer the loudest? Was it watching Darnell's stolen Porsche get towed away while he banged on the window? Or was it the look on Julian's face when he realized the woman he called a lab rat was actually his boss? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, never underestimate the person who knows the chemistry of the poison. Subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.